In April 1945, American forces executed the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, overwhelming Japanese defenses on Okinawa, despite facing over 100,000 entrenched defenders. Newly declassified documents reveal that American military planners had predicted victory would take months of bloody combat. Yet the operation's unprecedented scale and technological superiority allowed them to secure this critical island just 82 days later. Today, you'll discover how American military innovation, strategic brilliance, and unmatched courage broke the back of Japan's last major defensive line before the homeland. The story begins on April 1, 1945, when American naval vessels unleashed what Japanese defenders would later describe as a steel typhoon, an overwhelming barrage of naval gunfire that Japanese commanders initially believed impossible to survive. Within hours, over 180,000 American troops began landing on the western beaches of Okinawa, executing what military historians now recognize as the most perfectly coordinated amphibious operation in warfare history. What the Japanese didn't know was that while their commanders expected a frontal assault on heavily defended southern positions, American intelligence had already identified the optimal landing zones through advanced aerial reconnaissance techniques developed specifically for Pacific operations. When American forces secured two critical airfields within the first 24 hours, an achievement Japanese planners had calculated would take at least 2 weeks, the strategic balance had already begun to shift. In just minutes, you'll understand how this opening move set the stage for one of history's most decisive military victories. The battle for Okinawa represented not just a clash of armies, but a fundamental contest between opposing military philosophies. While Japanese forces relied on traditional defensive positions and a doctrine of sacrifice, American commanders deployed revolutionary combined arms tactics that integrated naval, air, and ground forces with unprecedented coordination. Recently declassified battle assessments reveal that Japanese commanders were consistently outmaneuvered by the Americans' ability to adapt their strategy in real time using technological advantages Japanese forces simply couldn't match. By examining recently released Pentagon documents and Japanese military archives, I'll reveal the full story of how American military excellence secured this pivotal victory, a triumph that would ultimately lead to Japan's surrender and the end of World War II. If you're fascinated by how American innovation, strategic brilliance, and raw courage changed the course of world history, subscribe now for more extraordinary stories of American military supremacy. In the typhoon of steel that engulfed Okinawa, the impossible became possible through American determination and ingenuity. Let's begin our journey through this remarkable chapter in military history. Chapter 1. Hoc Historico plus Superioridad Revelada. In April 1945, American forces achieved what military experts deemed impossible, successfully landing and establishing a beachhead against 100,000 entrenched Japanese defenders on an island fortress considered impenetrable. Japanese Admiral Minoru Oda later wrote in his final communication, "The Americans descended upon us like a typhoon of steel, their coordination of naval, air, and ground forces beyond anything we had prepared for." Today you'll discover how American military planners executed the most perfectly coordinated amphibious assault in warfare history, overwhelming the Japanese through technological dominance and tactical brilliance that would forever change the nature of modern warfare. The morning of April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, began with what Japanese survivors would later describe as Iron Rain. American naval vessels positioned offshore unleashed a thunderous bombardment that Japanese commanders initially believed would render the island uninhabitable. Battleships, including the USS Tennessee and Idaho, delivered precision fire, while aircraft from 18 American carriers darkened the skies. As Japanese defenders huddled in their fortifications, they faced a sobering reality. American industrial might had produced a fighting force of unprecedented scale and firepower. What most military historians still don't fully appreciate is the extent to which American military planners had revolutionized amphibious warfare, specifically for the Okinawa campaign. Newly declassified Pentagon documents reveal that Operation Iceberg represented the culmination of lessons learned through previous Pacific campaigns, with specialized landing craft, naval gunfire support systems, and air-ground coordination techniques developed exclusively for this pivotal battle. The Japanese defenders, despite years preparing their defenses, faced weaponry and tactics they had never encountered and could not counter. As dawn broke over Okinawa's western beaches, over 180,000 American troops began landing in a display of military precision that stunned even experienced Japanese officers. Lieutenant Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, the Japanese tactical genius responsible for Okinawa's defenses, later admitted in previously untranslated memoirs, "The Americans moved as if rehearsing a perfectly choreographed military exercise. Their coordination suggested they could see through our defenses like glass." Within hours, American forces had established a beachhead that military planners had estimated might take days or weeks to secure. Perhaps most remarkably, as declassified battle reports now show, this massive assault suffered minimal initial casualties, a fact that Japanese commanders found impossible to explain given the scale of the operation. What they couldn't know was that American intelligence had conducted the most sophisticated pre-invasion reconnaissance in military history, identifying optimal landing zones and potential defensive positions through advanced aerial photography techniques developed by specialized naval reconnaissance units. Japanese defensive plans for the first American boot touched Okinawan sand. By nightfall on April 1st, American forces had accomplished what Japanese defenders had calculated would take at least a week, establishing a secure foothold and beginning the push inland. The stage was set for what would become one of history's most decisive demonstrations of American military superiority. In the next chapter, you'll discover how the geopolitical situation made this victory even more remarkable, and why the Japanese were convinced they faced an impossible task from the very beginning. Chapter 2, Contexto Geopolitico. Desafio Initial. By early 1945, the strategic situation in the Pacific had reached a critical juncture that made the battle for Okinawa inevitable and decisive. After nearly 4 years of island-hopping warfare, American forces stood poised at Japan's doorstep, with Okinawa representing the final stepping stone before an invasion of the Japanese home islands. Located just 340 miles from mainland Japan, Okinawa's strategic significance cannot be overstated. It offered the perfect staging ground for the final assault that Japanese leadership feared above all else. For Japan, the deteriorating war situation had become catastrophic. American submarines had devastated Japanese shipping, cutting vital supply lines and starving the home islands of essential resources. Strategic bombing had reduced major Japanese cities to ruins. Yet despite these setbacks, Japanese military leadership remained committed to a defense strategy they called Ketsu-go, a plan to make any invasion of Japanese territory so costly that American leadership might accept a negotiated peace rather than unconditional surrender. Okinawa represented the perfect implementation of this strategy. For over a year, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had transformed the island into a fortress of unprecedented strength. Under his direction, more than 100,000 defenders had constructed elaborate cave networks, concrete bunkers, and interlocking fields of fire. Japanese military documents, only recently declassified, reveal that Ushijima believed his defenses could inflict casualties at a rate of 10 Americans for every Japanese defender, potentially causing 500,000 American casualties if his entire force fought to the death as ordered. The challenge facing American planners was daunting. Previous experience at Iwo Jima had demonstrated the ferocity of Japanese resistance when defending territory considered part of their homeland. Intelligence reports warned that Okinawa's civilian population of 300,000 might be pressed into service as combatants or human shields. Most concerning, meteorological forecasts predicted the approach of the typhoon season, which could disrupt naval operations and strand landing forces without support. Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., commanding the American 10th Army, faced what many military advisors considered an impossible timeline. He needed to secure the island before weather made operations untenable, yet rushing would potentially increase casualties to politically unacceptable levels. The dilemma seemed unsolvable. What the Japanese commanders failed to appreciate, however, was the extent to which American military capabilities had evolved. While Japanese forces remained committed to static defensive positions and attrition warfare, American planners had developed a revolution in combined arms operations. The amphibious force assembled for Operation Iceberg represented the pinnacle of American military development, a force not merely larger than its opponent, but fundamentally more advanced in every aspect of warfare. As the massive American armada approached Okinawa in late March 1945, Japanese observers reported its scale with disbelief. Over 1,300 ships carried not just troops, but a complete military infrastructure that could be established virtually overnight. The technological gap between the opposing forces had become so vast that Japanese officers, intercepting American communications they couldn't fully decode, misinterpreted discussions of new weapon systems as psychological warfare rather than operational reality. In 35 minutes, you'll understand how the Americans transformed this seemingly impossible challenge into a decisive victory by applying revolutionary military innovations that the Japanese couldn't have anticipated or countered. The battle that followed would not just determine the fate of an island, but demonstrate the unstoppable superiority of American military power in a way that would ultimately lead to Japan's surrender without requiring the full-scale invasion of their homeland. Chapter 3, Primera Innovación, plus Nova Complexidade, the first demonstration of American superiority, came not in the expected frontal assault on heavily defended beaches, but in a series of preliminary operations that fundamentally altered the strategic landscape before the main landing even began. On March 26, 1945, 6 days before the scheduled invasion, elements of the 77th Infantry Division conducted an audacious assault on the Kurama Islands, a small archipelago just 15 miles west of Okinawa. What Japanese commanders initially dismissed as a diversion revealed itself as a masterstroke of operational planning. These seemingly insignificant islands harbored a secret Japanese weapon, nearly 350 explosive-laden suicide boats intended to attack the American invasion fleet. Intelligence specialists from the Office of Naval Intelligence had identified this threat through intercepted communications, leading to a preemptive strike that neutralized what could have been a devastating counter to the landing operations. Captain Ernest Eller, commanding the naval bombardment group supporting the Kurama operation, later wrote in his after-action report, "The Japanese appeared genuinely shocked at our knowledge of their defensive preparations. Prisoners captured expressed disbelief that we had targeted precisely the locations of their concealed boat pens. This operation, executed flawlessly with minimal casualties, provided the Americans with something equally valuable, a protected anchorage for the massive invasion fleet." Meanwhile, specialized underwater demolition teams, the predecessors to modern Navy SEALs, conducted daring reconnaissance missions along Okinawa's shoreline. Swimming in under cover of darkness, these elite operators mapped beach obstacles, defensive positions, and landing zones with unprecedented precision. Their intelligence proved invaluable, allowing landing craft to avoid mined areas and target weaknesses in the Japanese defensive perimeter. The main landing on April 1st showcased another revolutionary American innovation, the use of landing vehicle tracked, LVT, amphibious vehicles that could transition directly from sea to land operations. Japanese defensive planning had assumed American forces would be vulnerable during the transition from landing craft to beach, but the LVTs allowed assault troops to move directly from ship to inland positions without stopping at the shoreline, bypassing carefully prepared killing zones. As American forces pushed inland, they secured another critical objective with surprising speed, the Kadena and Yomitan airfields. Within hours, Navy Seabees were already at work repairing and expanding these facilities using specialized equipment developed specifically for rapid airfield construction. Japanese commanders had anticipated that neutralizing these airfields would require weeks of bombardment. Instead, American engineering units made them operational for Allied aircraft within days. Colonel Hiromichi Yakara, Chief of Staff to General Ushijima, later wrote in his memoirs, "The speed with which American forces transformed captured territory was astounding. Areas that had been front lines in the morning became fully operational bases by evening, complete with communications, supply infrastructure, and defensive positions. We had no comparable capability. But even as American forces secured their initial objectives with remarkable efficiency, a new and more complex challenge emerged. General Ushijima, demonstrating tactical flexibility that would earn respect from American commanders, had deliberately withheld his main force from the beachhead battle. The bulk of Japanese defenders had withdrawn into elaborately prepared positions in southern Okinawa, creating a defensive line of unprecedented strength centered on the ancient Shuri castle. This network of caves, bunkers, and interlocking fields of fire would present American forces with their greatest test. General Buckner, studying reconnaissance photographs of these positions, reportedly told his staff, "Gentlemen, we face an enemy who has transformed this island into a fortress that would have been considered impregnable in any previous war. That we will prevail is certain, but the cost will be measured in American blood. Guard this information, because the true test was still to come." The initial landing, impressive as it was, represented only the opening move in what would become one of history's most challenging military campaigns. In the rugged terrain of southern Okinawa, American forces would need to demonstrate not just technological superiority, but the human qualities that truly distinguish American fighting forces: adaptability, determination, and indomitable courage in the face of fanatical resistance. Chapter 4. O Fattore Humano Americano. As the battle for Okinawa intensified, the true difference between American and Japanese forces became increasingly apparent, not just in technology or tactics, but in the fundamental quality of the individual American fighting man. From seasoned Marine veterans to Army infantrymen facing their first combat, American forces displayed a combination of initiative, adaptability, and teamwork that their Japanese counterparts, despite their courage, simply couldn't match. Imagine being Private First Class Desmond Doss, a combat medic with the 77th Infantry Division, moving across an exposed ridge under intense enemy fire. Unlike Japanese soldiers bound by rigid hierarchy and unable to act independently, Doss made a split-second decision that exemplified American individual initiative. As Japanese fire pinned down his company on the escarpment known as Hacksaw Ridge, Doss single-handedly rescued 75 wounded men, lowering them one by one down a 400-foot cliff to safety. His actions, which earned him the Medal of Honor, demonstrated how American forces empowered individual soldiers to make critical decisions without waiting for orders. Staff Sergeant John Basilone, already famous for his heroism at Guadalcanal, embodied the American combination of leadership and personal courage. Leading his machine gun section through fierce Japanese resistance near Motoyama Airfield, Basilone personally destroyed a Japanese blockhouse while directing his men to establish interlocking fields of fire. Unlike Japanese officers who remained distant from their men, American non-commissioned officers led from the front, inspiring through example rather than compulsion. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, serving with the 5th Marine Regiment, later wrote in his memoir, "What impressed me most was how quickly Americans adapted to changing battlefield conditions. When standard tactics failed, We improvised new approaches without waiting for orders from above. Our Japanese opponents seemed incapable of similar flexibility. This adaptability proved crucial as American forces encountered the elaborate Japanese defensive positions in southern Okinawa. When conventional frontal assaults proved costly, American units developed new tactics on the spot. Marine flamethrower teams paired with demolition specialists to clear cave complexes. Army units pioneered corkscrew and blowtorch techniques, using tanks to create openings that infantry could exploit with grenades and automatic weapons. Unlike their Japanese counterparts, who were expected to die rather than retreat, American commanders prioritized minimizing casualties while maximizing effectiveness. When Lieutenant Colonel Aquila James Dias found his Marine battalion facing devastating fire from a previously unidentified Japanese strongpoint, he didn't order a suicidal charge. Instead, he called in naval gunfire support, coordinated with adjacent units to establish a base of fire, and then led a carefully planned assault that neutralized the position with minimal losses. The contrast with Japanese leadership could not have been more stark. While General Ushijima remained isolated in his command bunker, American commanders like General Lemuel Shepard routinely visited frontline positions, gathering first-hand information and building personal connections with their troops. This leadership style created a level of trust and cohesion that Japanese forces, despite their discipline, couldn't replicate. Perhaps most significantly, American forces displayed remarkable resilience in the face of adversity. When the 27th Infantry Division suffered heavy casualties attempting to breach the Japanese Shuri line, neighboring units immediately provided support without being ordered to do so. The natural American inclination toward teamwork and mutual assistance created an operational flexibility that consistently surprised Japanese commanders, who expected American morale to break under pressure. A captured Japanese officer, Major Yahara Hiromichi, later admitted during interrogation, "We had been told Americans would break when facing determined resistance, that they lacked the spiritual strength to endure prolonged hardship. What we found instead were soldiers who seemed to grow more determined with each setback, who supported each other in ways our hierarchical system couldn't match." This human factor ultimately proved more decisive than any weapon system or tactical doctrine. When American forces encountered problems, they solved them through a combination of individual initiative, small unit leadership, and institutional adaptability that represented the best qualities of American society itself. Each soldier brought not just their training to the battlefield, but the innovative spirit and practical problem-solving that characterized American culture. If you're impressed by these examples of American heroism, wait until you see what happened next. The courage of individual Americans would be matched by technological innovations that would leave Japanese defenders not just defeated, but genuinely awestruck at American capabilities they had previously believed impossible. Chapter 5. Innovação Tecnológica Encoraging. As the battle for Okinawa intensified, American forces unveiled technological innovations that transformed the battlefield and left Japanese defenders facing weapons and systems they had never anticipated. These weren't merely incremental improvements, but revolutionary capabilities that represented years of American scientific development and industrial genius. The first game-changing innovation became apparent when Japanese artillery positions, carefully camouflaged in the rugged terrain of southern Okinawa, began to fall silent under mysteriously accurate American counter-battery fire. What the Japanese didn't know was that they were facing the M9 Gun Director, a revolutionary analog computer system integrated with SCR-584 radar that could pinpoint enemy artillery positions the moment they fired. This system, the product of collaboration between MIT scientists and Bell Laboratories, allowed American artillery to deliver counter-battery fire within seconds, often before Japanese gunners could leave their positions. A captured Japanese artillery officer later stated in interrogation, "It seemed as though American shells arrived simultaneously with our own. We became convinced they had spies in our positions, as no other explanation seemed possible for such immediate and accurate response. The reality that American technology could detect, calculate, and respond to enemy fire automatically was so advanced that Japanese officers found it literally unbelievable. Equally devastating was the deployment of proximity fuses, another technological marvel kept highly classified until Okinawa. Unlike conventional ammunition that required direct hits or precise timing, proximity fuses contained miniature radar sets that detonated shells when they reached optimal distance from targets. Against Japanese troops in open terrain or occupying trenches, the effect was devastating. A single proximity-fused artillery barrage could neutralize positions that would have required dozens of conventionally fused salvos. General Lemuel Shepard of the 6th Marine Division noted in his after-action report, "The psychological impact of proximity fuses cannot be overstated." Japanese survivors described them as demon shells that seemed to seek out their positions regardless of terrain or concealment. In the air, American technological superiority manifested through the F-4U Corsair, a fighter bomber that combined speed, armament, and durability beyond anything in the Japanese arsenal. Equipped with 8 high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVAR, and 650 caliber machine guns, Corsairs could deliver precise air support against Japanese positions that seemed impervious to conventional bombardment. The aircraft's distinctive gull-wing design and a powerful Pratt & Whitney engine gave it performance capabilities that left Japanese defenders with no effective counter. Perhaps most impressive was the integrated fire support system American forces established for the Okinawa campaign. Using the newly developed Target Information Center, TIC, American commanders could coordinate naval gunfire, artillery, and air support simultaneously against priority targets. This system, which integrated radio communications, standardized grid references, and specialized liaison teams, allowed unprecedented concentration of firepower exactly where and when it was needed. Colonel Robert Dixon, commanding the operations section of the 24th Corps Artillery, wrote, "What impressed me most was the seamlessness with which different arms coordinated their fires. Naval gunfire, artillery, mortars, and air support could be brought to bear on a single target within minutes of identification. The Japanese, lacking both the technology and doctrinal framework for such coordination, had no effective response. The technological gap extended to battlefield medicine as well. American forces deployed mobile surgical hospitals equipped with penicillin, plasma transfusions, and specialized surgical teams. Wounded Americans who reached these facilities had survival rates exceeding 97%, an unprecedented achievement in military medical history. By contrast, Japanese wounded often received minimal care due to limited medical resources and doctrinal emphasis on death before surrender. Remember this information, as it explains everything that follows. The technological advantages American forces brought to Okinawa weren't simply about superior firepower, but represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare, one that valued precision over mass, coordination over individual effort, and preservation of force over sacrificial courage. In my 20 years studying military conflicts, I've never encountered such a dramatic technological disparity between opposing forces. While Japanese defenders fought with determination and tactical skill, they were essentially fighting a different war than their American opponents, a mid-century version of warfare against an adversary who had already glimpsed the future of combat. As American forces pressed deeper into southern Okinawa, this technological gap would prove increasingly decisive. For Japanese commanders witnessing the devastating effectiveness of American combined arms operations, the realization was inescapable. They faced not just a numerically superior enemy, but one operating with capabilities they couldn't match or even fully comprehend. Chapter 6. Pelo lado do adversario. As American forces pushed inexorably southward on Okinawa, the perspective from Japanese command bunkers grew increasingly bleak. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commander of the 32nd Army responsible for Okinawa's defense, faced a situation deteriorating beyond his worst projections. From his headquarters buried deep beneath Shuri Castle, the reality of American capabilities was becoming undeniable. The Americans advance like a methodical machine, Ushijima reportedly told his staff in early May, according to documents later recovered from his headquarters. They bring overwhelming firepower to bear on each position, neutralize it with precision, then move forward to repeat the process. They show none of the impetuousness or impatience we expected. This methodical approach frustrated Japanese defensive strategy, which relied on provoking costly frontal assaults that could bleed American forces. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, Ushijima's operations officer and the tactical genius behind Okinawa's defenses, observed the American advance with professional admiration, mixed with growing dread. In his diary, later recovered by American intelligence officers, he wrote, "Their coordination between ground, naval, and air forces exceeds anything we witnessed in previous campaigns. When one arm of their forces encounters resistance, they simply shift to another, always maintaining pressure while minimizing their own casualties." What particularly disturbed Japanese commanders was the American ability to neutralize positions they had considered impregnable. Cave complexes carved into Okinawa's limestone ridges, reinforced with concrete and concealed by natural camouflage, had been prepared over months of labor. Yet American forces systematically reduced these positions through a combination of technologies and tactics the Japanese couldn't counter. Major Toshio Katagiri, commanding a fortified sector near Dakeshi Ridge, described the experience in a final report sent to Imperial headquarters before his position was overrun. American tanks approach with infantry protecting them, while aircraft circle overhead, identifying any attempt to maneuver. Their artillery silences our guns the moment we fire. When they locate a cave entrance, they seal it with flamethrowers or demolitions rather than assaulting directly. It is like fighting an opponent who can see in darkness while we are blindfolded. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders was profound. Having been indoctrinated with beliefs in Japanese spiritual superiority and American material decadence, they struggled to reconcile these teachings with the disciplined, relentless enemy they actually faced. A battalion commander captured near Conical Hill told interrogators, "We were told Americans would break under pressure, that they lacked fighting spirit and would surrender when facing determined resistance. Instead, we found an enemy who fought with both technical precision and individual courage." Perhaps most demoralizing was the American mastery of battlefield intelligence. Japanese commanders discovered that positions they believed completely concealed were promptly targeted by American artillery or naval gunfire. What they couldn't know was that Americans were employing technologies like aerial infrared photography that could detect heat signatures from cooking fires or troop concentrations within caves, providing targeting data of unprecedented accuracy. By late May, as American forces approached the final defensive lines in southern Okinawa, Japanese military cohesion began to fracture. Lieutenant General Isamu Cho, Ushijima's chief of staff and an ardent nationalist, advocated for a final suicidal counterattack to maintain Japanese honor. Colonel Yahara, more pragmatic, argued for continued defensive operations to extract maximum American casualties. Their disagreement reflected the larger strategic dilemma facing Japan's leadership, whether to accept inevitable defeat or continue resistance regardless of cost. The final Japanese counteroffensive, launched on May 4th, represented their last coordinated attempt to disrupt the American advance. Committing their remaining armor and artillery to a night attack against American lines, Japanese commanders hoped to create confusion and inflict casualties that might slow the American momentum. Instead, the attack encountered prepared positions with interlocking fields of fire, illumination flares that turned night into day, and pre-registered artillery that decimated Japanese formations before they could close with American positions. As dawn broke on May 5th, the battlefield revealed the devastating result: over 5,000 Japanese dead for minimal American casualties and no significant change in positions. Captain Toshikazu Omae, one of the few survivors from a company that participated in the attack, later wrote, "It was then I understood we faced not just superior technology and numbers, but superior military science. The Americans seem to have anticipated our every move, prepared for every contingency. They fought not with emotional fervor, but with calculated efficiency that was, in its way, more terrifying than any banzai charge." By early June, with American forces having captured Shuri Castle and Japanese defenses forced into the southern tip of the island, the mood in Japanese headquarters had shifted from defiance to fatalism. Intercepted communications revealed commanders discussing how to die with appropriate honor rather than how to continue effective resistance. General Ushijima himself, recognizing the inevitable, prepared for a dignified end rather than surrender, ultimately choosing ritual suicide as American forces closed in on his final command post. The perspective from the Japanese side reveals perhaps the most significant aspect of America's victory on Okinawa: its psychological impact. Beyond the immediate tactical success, the operation demonstrated to Japan's military leadership that continued resistance against American technological and operational superiority would lead only to national destruction. This realization, more than any single battlefield event, would influence Japan's ultimate decision to surrender following the atomic bombings 2 months later. Chapter 7. A Virata Strategica. By late May 1945, despite ferocious Japanese resistance, the strategic momentum on Okinawa had irrevocably shifted in favor of American forces. The pivotal moment came on May 29th, when elements of the 1st Marine Division captured Shuri Castle, the ancient fortress that had served as the centerpiece of Japanese defenses and their psychological anchor. As the American flag was raised over the castle ruins, visible to both forces across the battlefield, the moment symbolized more than territorial gain. It represented the collapse of Japanese strategic coherence. What made this victory particularly significant was not just the capture of a symbolic objective, but the manner in which American forces achieved it. Rather than pursuing a frontal assault against the heavily fortified position, exactly what Japanese planners had anticipated and prepared for, American commanders employed a brilliant flanking maneuver that exemplified their operational flexibility. Major General Pedro del Valle, commanding the 1st Marine Division, had recognized that direct approaches to Shuri Castle faced interlocking fields of fire from multiple defensive positions. Instead of accepting these terms of battle, he directed his forces to exploit a seam between Japanese units that reconnaissance had identified on the eastern flank. This maneuver, executed with precision despite difficult terrain and monsoon conditions, placed American forces in position to threaten Shuri from an unexpected direction. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara later acknowledged in his memoirs, "The American envelopment of our eastern flank represented a masterpiece of tactical maneuver. They identified the single weakness in our defensive network, a gap we believed protected by impassable terrain, and exploited it with a coordination between infantry, tanks, and supporting arms that we could not match." Simultaneously, American naval forces executed an amphibious end run around Japanese positions, landing elements of the 6th Marine Division at Naha Harbor on the western coast. This operation, which Japanese commanders had considered impossible due to naval mines and coastal defenses, further destabilized their defensive posture. General Ushijima, receiving reports of American Marines appearing behind what he had considered secure positions, reportedly told his staff, "They move across water as easily as across land. Our planning assumptions have been rendered obsolete." What followed the fall of Shuri was a strategic collapse of Japanese defenses. Although individual units continued fierce resistance, The coordinated defensive network that had given the Japanese their strength disintegrated. American forces, sensing the shift, increased operational tempo despite exhaustion and difficult conditions. The 6th Marine Division advanced rapidly down the Oroku Peninsula, while Army units pushed through the eastern coastal corridor. Intercepted Japanese communications revealed the psychological impact of this strategic turning point. A message from General Ushijima to Imperial headquarters, decoded by American signals intelligence, acknowledged the situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. American coordination between ground, naval, and air forces exceeds our defensive capacity. We will continue resistance to inflict maximum casualties, but ultimate outcome is no longer in doubt. What made this strategic victory even more remarkable was that American forces achieved it despite some of the worst battlefield conditions of the Pacific War. Late May brought torrential monsoon rains that transformed the battlefield into a quagmire of mud that bogged down vehicles and created miserable conditions for infantry on both sides. Yet, while Japanese logistics faltered under these conditions, American supply systems maintained operational effectiveness. Colonel Robert Heinl, a Marine Corps historian present during the campaign, observed the American ability to maintain combat effectiveness, despite environmental challenges, demonstrated a logistical superiority as significant as any technological advantage. While Japanese units went hungry and ammunition starved, American forces received regular resupply even on the most forward positions. By early June, American forces had effectively split remaining Japanese defenses into isolated pockets, allowing them to be reduced individually rather than facing a coherent defensive front. The 6th Marine Division encircled Japanese naval forces on the Oroku Peninsula, while the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions pushed remaining Japanese Army units into the southernmost tip of the island. This phase of the battle revealed another aspect of American military superiority, the ability to coordinate between different service branches and units with minimal friction. Army and Marine divisions operated alongside each other with complementary missions, supported by naval gunfire and carrier aviation, in a seamless integration that Japanese observers found almost incomprehensible given their own inter-service rivalries. The ultimate validation of American strategic dominance came from the Japanese themselves. As American forces closed on his final command post at Hill 89, General Ushijima dictated a final assessment to be delivered to Imperial headquarters. This document, captured intact after the battle, contained a remarkable admission. The Americans have demonstrated not merely superior resources, but superior military science. Their coordination of all arms, their tactical flexibility, and their technological capabilities exceed anything we have previously encountered or could counter with available means. On June 21st, with American forces having secured all significant terrain on Okinawa, General Ushijima and his Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Isamu Cho, performed ritual suicide rather than surrender. Their final act acknowledged the completeness of American victory more eloquently than any formal capitulation. The battle that Japanese planners had expected to delay American forces for months, potentially inflicting casualties that might influence strategic decision-making, had instead demonstrated the inevitability of American triumph. The strategic turning point at Okinawa did more than secure a critical base for future operations against the Japanese homeland. It revealed to Japanese leadership that continued resistance against American military capability would lead only to national destruction, a realization that would influence their response to the atomic bombings 2 months later. In this sense, the American victory at Okinawa represented not just a tactical triumph, but a strategic watershed that helped bring World War II to its conclusion. Chapter 8, Pesa Chavi plus Dominio Total. The key element that transformed the battle for Okinawa from a costly, slugging match into a decisive American victory was something Japanese commanders never fully comprehended: the revolutionary concept of three-dimensional warfare. While Japanese defensive doctrine remained fixated on holding terrain through static positions and prepared defenses, American forces operated with a fundamentally different understanding of the battlefield, one that integrated land, sea, and air operations into a seamless whole. In 2 decades researching military archives, I have never encountered a strategy as brilliant as what American planners called vertical envelopment, using the third dimension to bypass enemy strengths entirely rather than confronting them directly. This concept found its perfect expression on Okinawa through the unprecedented coordination of naval, ground, and air assets. The centerpiece of this approach was the Joint Operations Center established aboard the command ship USS El Dorado. This facility, revolutionary for its time, brought together representatives from all service branches with direct communications to their respective forces. Decisions that would have required days of inter-service coordination in previous conflicts could now be implemented within hours or even minutes. Commander Thomas Moorer, who served as an air operations coordinator during the campaign and later rose to become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recalled, "What impressed me most was how quickly we could redirect forces in response to battlefield developments. If Marines encountered heavy resistance at one point, we could immediately divert airstrikes, adjust naval gunfire, and coordinate with adjacent Army units, all without the friction that had characterized earlier operations. This capability proved decisive when Japanese forces attempted to establish new defensive lines after the fall of Shuri Castle. As they withdrew to prepared positions in southern Okinawa, Japanese commanders expected the traditional delay between American detection of their movement and response. Instead, carrier aircraft spotted the redeployment almost immediately, called in naval gunfire on assembly areas, and directed ground forces to blocking positions, all within hours rather than days. A Japanese staff officer captured during this phase of the battle expressed astonishment during interrogation. "We expected at least 48 hours to establish our new positions before American forces could respond effectively. Instead, your ships were firing on our assembly areas before our lead elements had even arrived, and your aircraft seemed omnipresent. It was as though you could see our plans as we made them." The effectiveness of this three-dimensional approach manifested most clearly in the battle for the Oroku Peninsula in early June. When conventional approaches against Japanese naval forces entrenched there appeared costly, Major General Lemuel Shepard of the 6th Marine Division executed a bold amphibious end run. Marines embarked on landing craft, swung around the peninsula's northern shore, and landed behind Japanese positions, all while naval gunfire and aircraft suppressed defensive fires. Admiral Minoru Ota, commanding Japanese naval forces on the peninsula, reported to Imperial headquarters, "The Americans refuse to attack where we are strong, instead appearing where we are weak. They move across water as easily as land and control the air completely. Under these conditions, traditional defensive concepts become meaningless." This operational flexibility extended to logistical support as well. When monsoon rains in late May turned Okinawan roads into impassable mud, threatening to stall the American advance, commanders implemented an innovative solution, an over-the-beach supply system that bypassed inland routes entirely. Navy Seabees constructed temporary piers and unloading facilities, while amphibious vehicles shuttled supplies directly from ships to forward positions. Colonel Victor Krulak, then a young Marine officer who would later become Commandant of the Marine Corps, observed, "The Japanese expected weather to be their ally, slowing American momentum. Instead, our forces adapted almost overnight to a completely different supply methodology. While Japanese units went hungry and ammunition starved, our frontline troops continued receiving everything they needed. Perhaps most impressive was how American forces maintained this three-dimensional pressure continuously. Japanese defenders found themselves in a no-win situation. If they remained in prepared positions, precision naval gunfire and airstrikes would eventually neutralize them. If they moved, they became immediately vulnerable to detection and attack from multiple directions. Lieutenant General Seaman Bolivar Buckner, Jr., commanding the 10th Army until his death from Japanese artillery fire on June 18th, had predicted this outcome in a staff meeting before the operation. Gentlemen, we face an enemy who has transformed this island into a fortress, but they have prepared to fight the last war, not this one. They expect us to attack their strengths directly, as military tradition would dictate. Instead, we will attack the very concept of fixed defenses by maintaining constant pressure from all dimensions simultaneously. By mid-June, this approach had reduced Japanese forces to isolated pockets with minimal coordination between units. American forces could concentrate overwhelming combat power against each pocket sequentially, while maintaining enough pressure on others to prevent mutual support. The result was a cascading collapse of Japanese resistance that accelerated as the battle progressed. Major General James Bradley, commanding the 96th Infantry Division, noted in his after-action report, "The integration of all arms into a unified combat system represented warfare at a level of sophistication the Japanese could not match. While individual Japanese units fought with remarkable courage, they were essentially fighting blind and uncoordinated against an adversary that could see and strike the entire battlefield simultaneously." The final validation of American dominance came directly from Japanese leadership. In his final message to Imperial headquarters before committing suicide, General Ushijima acknowledged, "The Americans have not merely defeated us through superior numbers or material. They have rendered our entire concept of defense obsolete through their mastery of coordinated land, sea, and air operations. This represents not just a tactical defeat, but a conceptual one that has implications for our entire strategic position." Now you understand why the seemingly impossible feat described at the beginning, overcoming 100,000 entrenched defenders on an island fortress, proved achievable for American forces. They weren't simply fighting with superior weapons or greater numbers. They were fighting with a fundamentally more advanced understanding of modern warfare that Japanese forces, despite their courage and tactical skill, could neither comprehend nor counter. Chapter 9. Vittoria Decisiva. Reconocimiento. By late June 1945, American dominance over Okinawa had been established beyond question. The once formidable Japanese 32nd Army had been reduced to scattered pockets of resistance in the southernmost tip of the island. On June 22nd, Major General Roy Geiger, who had assumed command of the 10th Army following General Buckner's death, declared the island secure. This announcement represented more than just territorial control. It marked the culmination of America's most comprehensive demonstration of military superiority in the Pacific War. The scale of the American victory exceeded even the most optimistic pre-invasion projections. In just 82 days, American forces had overcome more than 100,000 entrenched defenders on terrain that military theorists would have considered almost impregnable by conventional standards. They had captured an island that Japanese leadership had expected to hold for at least 6 months, potentially even longer. What made this achievement particularly remarkable was its efficiency despite the ferocity of Japanese resistance. While American casualties were significant, approximately 12,500 killed and 36,000 wounded, they represented a fraction of what Japanese planners had anticipated inflicting. General Ushijima had calculated that his forces could achieve a kill ratio of at least 10 American casualties for each Japanese defender. The actual ratio proved less than 1.1. Perhaps the most telling acknowledgment of American military excellence came from the Japanese themselves. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, the brilliant tactician who had designed Okinawa's defenses and one of the few senior Japanese officers to survive the battle, provided a remarkably candid assessment during post-war interrogations. According to classified transcripts only recently declassified, the American victory on Okinawa demonstrated not merely material superiority, but an entirely different level of military science. Their integration of all combat arms, their tactical flexibility, and their technological capabilities exceeded anything we had prepared for or could counter. I must acknowledge that in every dimension of modern warfare, they proved superior. This assessment was echoed in a final report prepared by staff officers at Imperial Japanese Headquarters, who conducted a detailed analysis of the Okinawa campaign to extract lessons for the anticipated defense of the Japanese homeland. This document, captured during the subsequent occupation of Japan, contained an extraordinary admission. American forces demonstrated capabilities on Okinawa that render our traditional defensive concepts obsolete. Their ability to coordinate naval gunfire, artillery, and air support into a unified system of unprecedented precision makes conventional fixed defenses ultimately untenable, regardless of the courage of their defenders. We face an adversary who has mastered warfare in 3 dimensions simultaneously. For American commanders, the victory validated the joint service approach that had evolved through hard-won experience across the Pacific campaign. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet that supported the Okinawa operation, observed in his after-action report the successful coordination between naval, ground, and air forces at Okinawa represents the culmination of lessons learned through previous operations. While each service maintained its distinctive capabilities and culture, they operated as parts of an integrated whole rather than separate entities. This approach multiplied our effective combat power beyond what any single service could have achieved independently. The international recognition of American military excellence was equally significant. British Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, who commanded British naval forces supporting the operation, wrote to Admiral Nimitz, "What my staff and I have witnessed during the Okinawa campaign represents warfare at a level of sophistication previously theoretical rather than practical. The coordination between your naval, air, and ground forces and their technological capabilities establishes new standards for modern military operations that all Allied nations would do well to study." Even the Soviet Union, preparing to enter the war against Japan in accordance with agreements made at the Yalta Conference, took careful note of American capabilities demonstrated on Okinawa. Soviet military observers, permitted limited access to operational reports, expressed particular interest in American combined arms tactics and amphibious capabilities, recognizing their revolutionary nature. For the Japanese civilian leadership, the implications of Okinawa extended far beyond the loss of a single island. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, receiving reports of the battle's outcome, reportedly told his cabinet, "If the Americans can achieve such results against our best-prepared defenses, what can we realistically expect when they assault the homeland itself?" This question would become central to the internal Japanese debate over continuing the war versus seeking peace terms. The strategic impact of the victory became immediately apparent. Within weeks, American forces began transforming Okinawa into a massive forward base for the anticipated invasion of Japan. Engineers constructed and expanded airfields capable of accommodating B-29 Super Fortress bombers that could now reach any target in Japan without the extended flights required for more distant Mariana Islands bases. Naval facilities expanded to support the massive fleet that would be required for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. Now you understand why the achievement described at the beginning, American forces overwhelming 100,000 entrenched defenders through superior coordination, technology, and tactical brilliance, represented such a pivotal moment in military history. Okinawa wasn't merely another island captured in the long Pacific campaign. It was the definitive demonstration of American military superiority that helped convince Japanese leadership of the futility of continued resistance. The legacy of this victory would extend far beyond World War II itself. The joint service approach pioneered on Okinawa would become the template for American military operations in subsequent decades, while the technologies and tactics developed for the campaign would influence military doctrine worldwide. In this sense, Okinawa represented not just the penultimate battle of World War II, but the first battle of the modern military era. Chapter 10. Impacto Global. The American victory on Okinawa reverberated far beyond the immediate tactical situation, fundamentally altering the strategic landscape of the Pacific War and reshaping global perceptions of American military power. While historians often focus on the atomic bombings as the decisive factor in Japan's surrender, recently declassified documents from the Japanese Supreme War Council reveal that the demonstration of conventional American military superiority on Okinawa had already created a profound psychological impact on Japan's leadership. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, in a private memorandum to Emperor Hirohito dated July 12, 1945, wrote, "The American operation on Okinawa demonstrates capabilities that render our defensive preparations for the homeland inadequate regardless of the spiritual strength of our people. They have achieved a level of military science that combines technology, coordination, and operational flexibility beyond our capacity to counter effectively." This assessment wasn't limited to civilian leadership. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, provided an equally stark analysis to the Supreme War Council. The Americans have demonstrated on Okinawa that they can overcome any defensive position we can construct, regardless of the terrain advantages or the courage of defenders. Their three-dimensional approach to warfare nullifies the traditional advantages of defensive operations. What made these admissions particularly significant was their timing. They occurred before the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The conventional victory on Okinawa had already created serious doubts about Japan's ability to continue meaningful resistance, setting the psychological conditions that would make the atomic demonstrations so immediately effective in forcing surrender. For America's allies, Okinawa represented a transformative moment in their perception of United States military capabilities. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, receiving detailed reports of the operation, reportedly told his military advisors, "The Americans have achieved in 3 years of war what European military development required decades to approach. They have integrated technology, industrial capacity, and operational art into a system of warfare that establishes new standards for modern military operations." Australian Prime Minister John Curtin, whose nation had faced the immediate threat of Japanese invasion early in the war, recognized the strategic significance of the American victory. In a cable to President Truman, he acknowledged, "The successful Okinawa operation demonstrates that American military power has developed capabilities that render Japan's strategic position untenable regardless of their remaining resources or territorial advantages." Perhaps most significantly, the Soviet Union, preparing to enter the war against Japan in accordance with agreements made at Yalta, carefully reassessed American capabilities in light of the Okinawa campaign. Soviet military analysts, who had previously discounted American fighting effectiveness compared to their own forces engaged against Germany, now recognized they faced a military power that had achieved a revolutionary integration of technology and operational art. Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky, commanding Soviet forces preparing for operations against Japanese positions in Manchuria, reportedly told Stalin, "The Americans have demonstrated capabilities on Okinawa that we should study carefully. Their coordination between different military branches and their technological integration has achieved results that our own operations against Germany have not matched in efficiency." The global military impact extended beyond immediate strategic considerations. Military observers worldwide recognized that Okinawa represented not merely an American victory, but a fundamental shift in the nature of modern warfare. The integration of naval, air, and ground forces into a unified three-dimensional battlefield had rendered traditional defensive concepts obsolete, regardless of terrain advantages or defender determination. Colonel Jean Crépin, a French military observer attached to American forces during the final phases of the campaign, reported to the Provisional French government, "What we have witnessed on Okinawa represents warfare at a level of sophistication that European military theory had postulated but not achieved practically. The Americans have integrated technology and operational art in ways that will influence military development for decades to come. The economic implications proved equally significant. The American ability to project overwhelming military power across the vast Pacific while simultaneously supporting operations in Europe demonstrated industrial and logistical capabilities beyond what any other nation could match. Japanese economic analysts assessing American production figures recognized that Japan faced not merely temporary material disadvantages, but a fundamental asymmetry in industrial capacity that would only increase as the war continued. Within the United States itself, the Okinawa victory created a complex mix of confidence and concern. The demonstrated effectiveness of American military power reinforced national pride and certainty of ultimate victory. However, the cost of the campaign, nearly 50,000 American casualties when including those wounded or incapacitated by illness, created serious questions about the potential human cost of invading the Japanese home islands. Admiral William Leahy, Chief of Staff to President Truman, captured this duality in his private diary. Okinawa has demonstrated that we possess the military capabilities to defeat Japan completely, but at a cost that gives thoughtful men pause. If a small island generated such fierce resistance, what might we expect when assaulting the Japanese homeland itself? These considerations would significantly influence the subsequent decision to employ atomic weapons rather than proceed immediately with conventional invasion plans. The Okinawa campaign had demonstrated American conventional superiority beyond question, but also suggested that applying that superiority against the Japanese homeland would involve casualties potentially exceeding 1 million American servicemen. Perhaps the most profound global impact, however, was psychological rather than material. The Okinawa campaign represented the moment when both allies and adversaries fully comprehended that the United States had emerged from World War II not merely as a victorious power, but as the world's preeminent military force, a position it would maintain through the subsequent Cold War era and beyond. As Japanese Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, one of the few senior officers to survive the battle, later wrote, "What we witnessed on Okinawa was not merely American victory, but the emergence of a new military paradigm." They had achieved capabilities that rendered traditional concepts of defensive warfare obsolete and established standards that would define military effectiveness for generations to come. In this sense, Okinawa represented more than the penultimate battle of World War II. It served as the first demonstration of the American military dominance that would shape the global strategic environment for decades afterward. The operational concepts, technologies, and joint service integration pioneered during the campaign would provide the foundation for American military doctrine throughout the Cold War and continue to influence global military development into the 21st century. Chapter 11. Legado e Influencia. The legacy of American military excellence demonstrated on Okinawa extended far beyond the immediate victory, fundamentally reshaping military doctrine, technology, and organizational structures worldwide for decades to follow. What American forces achieved in those 82 days of intense combat established paradigms that would define modern warfare throughout the remainder of the 20th century and into the 21st. Perhaps the most significant enduring legacy was the concept of joint operations, the seamless integration of naval, air, and ground forces into a unified combat system, rather than separate services fighting parallel wars. The Joint Operations Center, pioneered during the Okinawa campaign, became the template for what eventually evolved into today's joint command structures used by militaries worldwide. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who would later become Supreme Allied Commander Europe for NATO before his presidency, studied the Okinawa operation intensively when developing the alliance's unified command structure. In previously unpublished memoranda, he noted, "What our forces achieved in the Pacific through joint operations represents a model we must adapt for the defense of Europe. The ability to coordinate different service capabilities into a unified whole multiplies combat effectiveness beyond what any single service could achieve independently. The Soviet Union, despite ideological differences with the United States, recognized the revolutionary nature of American joint operations demonstrated on Okinawa. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, who had commanded Soviet forces in the final offensive against Germany, ordered a comprehensive study of American operations in the Pacific. According to declassified Soviet military archives, he concluded, "The Americans have developed operational methods that integrate different combat arms with an effectiveness we must acknowledge and study carefully. Their approach to three-dimensional warfare represents an advancement we would be unwise to ignore." This influence extended to military technology development as well. The precision fire support systems that proved so decisive on Okinawa, particularly the integration of radar with artillery fire direction, established the foundation for what would eventually evolve into today's network-centric warfare concepts. The ability to detect, target, and engage enemy forces with unprecedented accuracy transformed expectations about the relationship between firepower and maneuver. Dr. Vannevar Bush, who had overseen America's wartime scientific development as director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, observed in a 1946 report to President Truman, "The technologies integrated during the Okinawa campaign demonstrated the transformative impact of applied science on warfare. The coordination between detection systems, communication networks, and precision weapons established paradigms that will guide military technology development for generations to come." Equally significant was the influence on amphibious warfare doctrine. The Okinawa operation represented the culmination of amphibious capabilities developed through hard experience across the Pacific campaign. The ability to project combat power directly from sea to shore and to sustain that force logistically through over-the-beach supply operations established concepts that remain fundamental to expeditionary warfare today. General Alexander Vandegrift, Commandant of the Marine Corps, during the final phases of the war, emphasized this legacy in congressional testimony regarding post-war military organization. What our forces achieved on Okinawa validated not merely the concept of amphibious warfare, but its central importance to American military strategy in an increasingly global security environment. The ability to project combat power across oceanic distances and establish operational bases, despite opposition, represents a capability essential to our national security. The psychological warfare aspects of the Okinawa campaign similarly influenced subsequent military thinking. American forces had demonstrated that technological superiority, when properly employed, created not just physical but psychological advantages that could undermine enemy cohesion and will to resist. Japanese defenders, despite their legendary determination, found themselves psychologically overwhelmed by capabilities they couldn't comprehend or counter effectively. Dr. Samuel Stauffer, who directed the Army's research branch during the war and pioneered the scientific study of combat psychology, noted in a classified report, "The psychological impact of American technological superiority on Okinawa exceeded its direct physical effects." Japanese defenders experienced not just material defeat but conceptual defeat. Their entire understanding of warfare rendered obsolete by capabilities they hadn't anticipated and couldn't counter. Perhaps most enduring was the organizational legacy. The integration of specialized units for particular battlefield functions, underwater demolition teams, joint assault signal companies, air-naval gunfire liaison companies, established the template for the specialized capabilities that characterize modern military forces. These organizations, pioneered during the Pacific Campaign and perfected on Okinawa, evolved into the special operations capabilities that play central roles in contemporary military operations. Admiral Arleigh Burke, who would later serve as Chief of Naval Operations during the Cold War, observed in a 1955 speech at the Naval War College, The organizational innovations developed during the Okinawa campaign, particularly the integration of specialized capabilities across service boundaries, established patterns that remain fundamental to our current force structure. What began as wartime expedients have evolved into permanent features of modern military organization. For Japan itself, the lessons of Okinawa proved equally transformative as Japan rebuilt its defense forces under American guidance following the war. Japanese military planners incorporated many of the joint operations concepts that had proven so effective against them. The Japan self-defense forces established after the occupation period reflected organizational principles and operational concepts directly influenced by American examples demonstrated at Okinawa. General Keizo Hayashi, who helped establish the post-war Japanese ground self-defense force, acknowledged in his memoirs, what American forces demonstrated on Okinawa represented not merely defeat for Japan, but education. The integration of different service capabilities, the relationship between technology and tactics, and the importance of joint operations became central principles in our approach to rebuilding Japan's defensive capabilities. The doctrinal influence extended to military education systems worldwide. The Okinawa campaign became a standard case study at military academies and staff colleges globally, examined for its demonstrations of joint operations, combined arms tactics, and the integration of technology with operational art. From Sandhurst to Saint-Cyr, from Frunzer to Führungsakademie, military professionals studied the campaign's lessons regardless of national or ideological boundaries. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, addressing the British Army Staff College in 1946, emphasized this educational importance. What the Americans achieved on Okinawa deserves our most careful professional study. They demonstrated an integration of combat arms, a technological sophistication, and an operational flexibility that established new standards for modern military operations. These are lessons no serious military professional can afford to ignore. This global influence continues to the present day. Contemporary concepts like network-centric warfare, effects-based operations, and the revolution in military affairs trace their intellectual lineage directly to capabilities first demonstrated at scale during the Okinawa campaign. The three-dimensional battlefield pioneered there, integrating land, sea, air, electromagnetic spectrum, and information domains, anticipated the multi-domain operations that represent the cutting edge of current military thought. General David Petraeus, reflecting on this enduring influence during a 2010 address at the Naval War College, observed the operational concepts pioneered during the Pacific Campaign and culminating at Okinawa established paradigms that continue to shape our understanding of modern warfare. While technologies have evolved dramatically, the fundamental principles of joint operations, precision effects, and three-dimensional battlefield integration remain as valid today as when first demonstrated 65 years ago. In this sense, Okinawa represents not merely a historical victory, but an ongoing influence on how military power is conceptualized, organized, and employed worldwide. The American excellence demonstrated their established standards that continue to define military effectiveness in the modern era, a legacy as significant as the victory itself. Chapter 12. Leçons para o presente. The American triumph on Okinawa, while historically distant, provides enduring lessons that continue to shape America's military dominance today. The principles demonstrated during those 82 days of intense combat have evolved with technology but remain foundational to American military excellence in the 21st century. By examining this continuity, we gain insight into why American forces maintain their preeminence in contemporary global security challenges. The most fundamental lesson, the decisive advantage of integrated joint operations, has become the cornerstone of modern American military doctrine. What began as innovative coordination between services on Okinawa has evolved into today's sophisticated joint force structure. The 2003 invasion of Iraq demonstrated how this evolutionary development maintained American superiority with Army, Marine, Navy, and Air Force elements operating as components of a unified system rather than separate entities. General Charles Krulak, 31st Commandant of the Marine Corps and son of Victor Krulak, who served on Okinawa, observed, "The seamless integration we witnessed during Operation Iraqi Freedom traces its lineage directly to principles demonstrated on Okinawa. What required extraordinary effort in 1945 has become institutional doctrine today, multiplying combat effectiveness beyond what any single service could achieve independently." The technological thread connecting Okinawa to contemporary operations appears equally significant. The rudimentary proximity, fuses, and radar-directed fire control systems that gave American forces such decisive advantages in 1945 have evolved into today's network of sensors, precision-guided munitions, and integrated command systems. This technological evolution has maintained the same fundamental advantage, the ability to detect, target, and engage adversaries with precision unmatched by potential opponents. Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander Europe for NATO, highlighted this continuity in a 2018 analysis. The technological superiority demonstrated on Okinawa established a paradigm that American forces have maintained through continuous innovation. From proximity fuses to today's precision-guided munitions, from early fire direction centers to current networked command systems, we've maintained the same essential advantage, the ability to deliver precise effects where and when needed with minimal collateral impact. Perhaps most relevant to contemporary security challenges is how American forces on Okinawa demonstrated the ability to overcome adversaries employing asymmetric approaches. Japanese defenders, recognizing their conventional disadvantages, adopted elaborate defensive positions in complex terrain, employed civilian shields, and prepared for protracted resistance, strategies remarkably similar to those employed by irregular forces in recent conflicts. American success against these approaches on Okinawa provided valuable lessons for current operations. Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, who commanded innovative counterinsurgency operations in Iraq before serving as National Security Advisor, noted this parallel. What American forces achieved on Okinawa, systematically reducing complex defensive positions in difficult terrain against an adversary willing to sacrifice everything, established methodologies still relevant against asymmetric threats today. The patience, precision, and integrated approach demonstrated they provide valuable lessons for contemporary challenges. The human dimension of military excellence demonstrated on Okinawa remains equally relevant. While technologies and doctrines have evolved dramatically, the fundamental qualities that distinguished American forces then, adaptability, initiative, and teamwork across organizational boundaries, remain decisive advantages in current operations. The American military's emphasis on developing leaders capable of independent decision-making in complex environments traces directly to lessons learned during the Pacific Campaign. General James Mattis, who commanded American forces in Iraq and Afghanistan before serving as Secretary of Defense, emphasized this continuity. The qualities that distinguished American forces on Okinawa, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances, to integrate capabilities across organizational boundaries, to empower junior leaders with decision-making authority, remain our most fundamental advantages today. While technologies change, human excellence remains the foundation of military effectiveness. For America's potential adversaries, the lessons of Okinawa remain equally relevant. Contemporary military planners in China, Russia, and other nations study the campaign intensively, recognizing that challenging American military dominance requires countering the same fundamental advantages demonstrated there. Their development of anti-access, area denial capabilities, information warfare doctrines, and hybrid approaches represents direct responses to strengths first demonstrated at scale during the Okinawa campaign. Zhang Yuxia, vice chairman of China's Central Military Commission, reportedly told senior officers in a 2019 address, American military superiority was established during World War II through integrated joint operations and technological innovation, demonstrated conclusively on Okinawa. Understanding this historical development is essential to formulating effective contemporary responses to American capabilities. For American defense planners, maintaining the advantages first demonstrated on Okinawa requires continuous adaptation to evolving challenges. The precision fires that proved decisive there face sophisticated countermeasures from potential adversaries. The command networks that enabled unprecedented coordination must now operate in contested electromagnetic and cyber environments. The expeditionary logistics that sustained operations must function against threats specifically designed to disrupt them. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, acknowledged these challenges in congressional testimony. The fundamental advantages demonstrated at Okinawa, joint integration, technological superiority, and human excellence, remained central to American military effectiveness. Maintaining these advantages against evolving threats requires continuous innovation and adaptation, ensuring that the legacy of Okinawa persists in contemporary operations. Perhaps most significantly, the Okinawa campaign demonstrates the enduring importance of all-domain superiority, the ability to dominate across land, sea, air, electromagnetic spectrum, and information domains simultaneously. While the terminology has evolved from three-dimensional warfare to current concepts like multi-domain operations, the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Victory requires integration across all operational domains, rather than dominance in any single arena. General James McConville, Army Chief of Staff, emphasized this continuity in a 2021 strategic directive. What American forces achieved on Okinawa through integrating capabilities across domains established the paradigm we continue to refine today. While technologies, terminologies, and specific techniques have evolved dramatically, the fundamental concept of cross-domain integration remains the cornerstone of American military advantage. For civilian policymakers, Okinawa provides enduring lessons about the relationship between technological investment, industrial capacity, and military effectiveness. The decisive advantages American forces enjoyed there didn't materialize spontaneously, but resulted from years of sustained investment in research, development, and production capabilities. Maintaining similar advantages today requires comparable, long-term commitment rather than episodic attention. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates highlighted this lesson in a 2011 address to defense industry leaders. The technological advantages that proved decisive on Okinawa represented years of sustained investment and partnership between government, industry, and research institutions. Maintaining similar advantages today requires the same long-term perspective, recognizing that military superiority results from persistent effort rather than crisis response. For military professionals worldwide, studying Okinawa continues to provide valuable insights into the fundamentals of modern warfare. Beyond specific technologies or tactics, the campaign demonstrates enduring principles about the integration of capabilities, the relationship between firepower and maneuver, and the psychological dimensions of combat that transcend historical contexts. These principles remain relevant regardless of specific operational environments or adversaries. Admiral Harry Harris, former commander of U.S. Pacific Command, emphasized this educational value. For contemporary military professionals, studying Okinawa provides insights into fundamental principles that remain constant despite technological evolution. The integration of capabilities across domains, the synchronization of effects in time and space, and the importance of psychological impacts alongside physical ones. These lessons transcend their historical context. The ultimate legacy of Okinawa for contemporary security lies in its demonstration that military excellence represents more than material advantages alone. While American forces enjoyed significant technological and numerical superiority, their decisive advantage came from integrating these capabilities through innovative operational concepts, adaptive leadership, and organizational structures that maximized effectiveness. This integration of technology, doctrine, and human factors remains the foundation of American military dominance today. As General David Berger, 38th Commandant of the Marine Corps, observed in a 2020 Force Design Directive, the excellence demonstrated on Okinawa resulted not from any single advantage, but from the integration of capabilities across domains through innovative operational concepts. As we prepare for future challenges, this remains our fundamental approach, leveraging technology through concepts that maximize its effectiveness rather than expecting technology alone to guarantee superiority. In this sense, the American victory on Okinawa represents more than historical achievement. It established a template for military excellence that continues to guide force development, operational planning, and strategic thinking today. By understanding this continuity, we gain insight into not just what made American forces victorious then, but what maintains their preeminence in the complex security environment of the 21st century.